All right. Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator at the Center for Alzheimer's Research and Treatment. Our center is part of Brigham and Women's Hospital in Longwood. And if you weren't here with us last week, basically, we are doing a 3-week educational series about Alzheimer's disease. So last week, we talked about the basics behind Alzheimer's, simply what the disease is, how it differs from other types of dementia, symptoms that are fairly common, especially in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, as well as what you can do to prevent progression of cognitive impairment. So today we're going to shift gears a little bit and focus more on clinical trials, specifically the different phases that go through clinical trials and how, as a participant, if you're ever interested in getting involved, what that would entail of you in terms of screening for a clinical trial and then actually enrolling in one. So let's get started. All right, first, I want to think a little bit about how medications were created. We have all in our lifetime, I'm sure, taken medications, whether it's Tylenol for a headache or any other type of medication. Especially as we age, we tend to see doctors a little bit more. So different illnesses may progress. And so we're taking different medications in those cases. But in order for them to be put on the market and for us to be able to either get them prescribed or buy them at the pharmacy, they had to have gone through some type of clinical trial approval process. And that's where the FDA really gets involved in the United States. So in general, for every medication that we take, they had to have gone through research. And that's a really big reason why research matters so much. Here are a couple other ones. It's the only thing that will change the course of Alzheimer's disease. A small portion of the population participates in research. So it's important that we get the word out there about what is available so that we can get a better representation of our very diverse community, not only in Boston, but around the world, so that research can be tailored best to the general population. 3, it may delay or prevent the course of Alzheimer's disease. So research in that area specifically will only either help yourself if you are seeing that progression of cognitive impairment, or it might help others in the future that find themselves in a similar scenario. And lastly, we will also be able to learn a lot more about Alzheimer's disease, the brain, and aging. Not all of the research that we do is just focused on Alzheimer's disease, dementia, but we do a lot of either preventative studies or preclinical trials, which means in the years before symptoms even start to show up for someone that's developing Alzheimer's. So it gives us a broad interpretation of what the healthy brain is doing while it's aging. And that is all important in learning more about ourselves, the way our brain works, and about how an unhealthy brain works differently. All right, we have 2 types of studies at Brigham and Women's Hospital and in clinical research in general. We have observational studies and clinical trials. So for observational studies, researchers will observe and record data over a period of time. It can be weeks, months, it could also be one day. Some studies could be very short. They include healthy people, people with the disease that's being studied, or people who are at high risk for developing the disease being studied. So it's kind of a big range of the types of participants that we'll see, depending on what they're trying to observe in an observational study. And the overall goal is to determine new ways to detect or track this disease. Again, comparing that healthy brain versus a non-healthy brain in order to see the differences, track the disease progression, things like that. For clinical trials, they're a little bit different. These involve an intervention with either a drug or treatment that's being studied. And we're basically trying to assess if it is safe enough and effective enough to have humans take the drug. And that's why clinical trials are so important. We're basically trying to see if they are safe enough for the general population, see if there's any adverse effects that come with it, or if it's just not working in the way that we hypothesize that it might have. Clinical trials have very specific criteria that must be met to participate. Often they include a diagnosis of some sort. So for Alzheimer's disease studies, they often need participants that either have a mild cognitive impairment diagnosis or another type of dementia or cognitive decline. Clinical trials often last a bit longer than observational studies, usually months or years. And the overall goal is to determine new ways to treat or prevent that disease. So we are trying to see if the new therapies or drugs that we're developing are working in order to prevent or even delay the progression of the disease. And so today we'll mostly be talking about clinical trials. There are 4 phases of clinical trials, and each of them builds on the knowledge gained from the previous one. So we're going to start with phase 1. The overall goal is to evaluate the pharmacology and toxicity of the drug in humans. Normally, we see a small group of healthy participants. This can be anywhere between 6 to 20, so very, very small cohort. In phase 2, the goal is now to test the drug's safety and efficacy, which is really what we're honing in on these clinical trials for. We normally see that phase 2 has a larger group of patients with the target disease, so not necessarily healthy anymore. And this tends to be a group between 50 to 300 participants. They are randomized into 3 groups. The first being the group that receives the investigational drug, the second being the group that receives standard treatment, so whatever is already offered on the market, if anything. And the third group receives a placebo, which is just a saline solution that wouldn't necessarily impact the disease progression, at least through any mechanism in the body. And lastly, these studies are also double blind, which means that neither the participant nor the doctor knows which treatment is assigned to which participant. So although the group is randomized, nobody really knows who is getting what sort of treatment, because then that would increase bias in the study. All right, moving on to phase 3, the goal is to evaluate how well the drug works. So there are thousands of participants in this phase that are more representative of the general population. We often try to see diverse groups of people, not only racially and ethnically, but also maybe a range of cognitive impairment, a range of other comorbidities that wouldn't be impacted by receiving this drug, things like that. These tend to be lengthy protocols. They can last up to 5 years. And we're really just trying to learn more about those side effects, especially in the broader population. In phase 3, either a half or sometimes 2/3 of the participants may receive the investigational drug just to be able to track those side effects. And if the data shows that the drug is working effectively and safely, then the placebo group may later receive the drug if the study is what we call open label, which is then where the doctors know which participant is in which group, and then we could tailor the drug intervention to those that we know have been receiving the placebo. All right. And again, randomized and blinded unless they're considered that open label. All right, phase 4 studies, the goal is to assess the drug's performance in real life scenarios. So this phase really comes after the FDA has analyzed the results of phase 3 studies, which then means they've also analyzed phase 1 and phase 2, right? So the FDA then decides if the drug is ready for market approval. If it is, that is when we can see it go into phase 4, where we're assessing the drug in real life. That's where we can see new adverse effects come up, especially for groups that were excluded in earlier phases. These groups tend to be pregnant women, children, people with autoimmune disorders, just because we don't want to include them in clinical trials if they may be adversely affected. But in the case that they need the drug in real life, then we can learn more about that. And then if the drug harms more people than it benefits, it may be withdrawn from the market. So even after going through all 4 of these phases, if we see that the adverse effects for the general population in real life are too risky compared to the benefits that the drug provides, it can be taken off the market. All right. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how participants are protected within clinical trials. First, we have what we call the Institutional Review Board. This is a committee that reviews all studies before they begin, and they ensure minimal risk for the participants and that all of our procedures are ethical and that they need to happen in order to assess the safety and efficacy of the drug that we're studying. Before the IRB review, though, the research team writes a detailed protocol and an informed consent that would describe the study's purpose, importance, procedures, risks, and benefits, and all of the participants' rights. So before participants even sign up for participating in a study, they review not only the detailed protocol, but also go through an informed consent process where a physician who is involved in the study touches on all aspects that is described and answers any questions that the participants may have. We also have federal laws and hospital rules in place to protect participants. And the study team at our clinical site will also help, especially to review that informed consent, answer any questions. And in the case that a participant who is already enrolled wishes to withdraw at any time for any reason, the study team will make sure that the participant's regular medical care is not affected, and we will review records to ensure that the withdrawal is done safely, especially if they are receiving that drug, just to make sure that they get taken off it at a safe rate, whatever that entails. Okay, here we have a couple of rights that you would have as a participant at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I'm going to just read them all out loud so that you can hear them straight from me. First, you'll be able to understand what is being studied and why it is being studied. You have the right to understand what you will be asked to do and what to expect the research team to do if you join the study. You have the right to understand any risks, side effects, or discomforts that you might expect if you join the study. And again, these are all outlined in the protocol and in the informed consent. You have the right to understand possible benefits of joining the study. This can be sometimes if you are compensated, that's just dependent on the funding that comes with each study. You have the right to know if and how you might be paid for your time. Again, that compensation. You have the right to know if you might have to pay for anything as part of the study. For example, co-pays for doctor visits or parking for study visits. At our center, you don't have to pay for any of the research visits, and parking is often reimbursed. And if you ever need transportation to the center, depending how far you live from us, that can also be reimbursed or provided for you. You have the right to understand whether any medicines, treatments, or devices used in the study are different from usual care one might receive. So that is the difference between what would be considered standard care and this investigational drug that we are trying to learn more about. You also have the right to ask any questions and receive answers from the research team before consenting or agreeing to join the study. You have the right to take your time deciding whether you want to join the study. If you want to talk about it with your primary care physician, maybe you already have a neurologist outside of Brigham and Women's that you want to touch base with. You can also talk to your family about it before even deciding to enroll. You have the right to know about treatment and care available if you experience side effects during the study. You have the right to receive a signed and dated copy of the consent agreement. Both you and the study team sign when you join the study. You have the right to know about major changes to the study that impact you after you join. So if there are protocol changes, maybe dosage changes on the drug, you will definitely be notified. And often with any protocol changes, you will have to reconsent into the study. So if you choose that those changes aren't aligning with what you thought was expected of you, you can always choose not to sign and withdraw from the study. And with that being said, you have the right to quit the study at any time and have the help of the study team to safely stop any treatments or medicine. You also have the right to freely choose whether you join a study without feeling like you should or have to join. That is something I really want to emphasize because at the end of the day, research is completely voluntary. Yes, it may help your health, your family's health, or other people's health in the future. And there are benefits to joining, but at the end of the day, nobody is pressuring you. It is completely your choice. All right. So moving on a bit from instead of the rights you have about as a participant, let's say you decide to get started in the process of participating in clinical trials. There are three main steps you have to take. The first is a pre-screening phone call, and this will just determine if you're eligible for a specific study at our center. And we do that using your medical history and any memory test results, either that you already have from the past 6 months, or we can also do a quick cognitive screen on the phone. During that phone call, you will also learn, especially for any clinical trials where you're either symptomatic or have any sort of cognitive decline, that a study partner is required. A study partner is anybody in your day-to-day life that spends enough time with you to know how you function physically, cognitively, just it could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be a coworker, anyone in your day-to-day life. And often we require them to join you for some of the visits at the hospital. They also are required to fill out some questionnaires on your behalf, just so we have another point of reference for how your cognition is changing over time. So that pre-screening phone call is usually anywhere between 20 to 45 minutes, where the study team will ask you a range of questions about your medical history, specifically hitting on any other diagnoses that you may have, any traumatic brain injury from your past, anything that could be important in letting us know your cognitive state. And then with that, we'll also have you sign a medical record release form. This just gives our center and our physicians access to your records, especially if you're not already part of the Brigham and Women's Health System, just so that we can review how any of your past diagnoses, active illnesses, any active medications that you're taking, if they may change your safety if you also start taking this investigational drug. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure that all the procedures in our clinical trials that you may be interested in are safe for you. And that's the reason that we do this entire pre-screen phone call. So if after that, one of our current studies is a good fit for you and you're still interested in participating after learning more about the study, one of our coordinators will reach out to you. And that's where we get into the second step. We will start some screening visits. So after that coordinator reaches out to you to schedule the first of many visits, we will go through an informed consent with the study physician where you'll, again, review those procedures, the risks and benefits, ask any questions, and then you can decide as a participant if you wish to enroll in the study. If you do, then you go through a couple more screening visits that can take up to several weeks or months, just depending on how often you can come into the hospital to do so. These visits will encompass questionnaires, medical procedures such as any brain scans. Sometimes the clinical trials require a lumbar puncture. Sometimes they require echocardiograms just to look at your heart to make sure everything is safe there. We'll also do some blood labs to make sure that all of your cell count levels are okay and that you're healthy enough to proceed through our clinical trial. We will also do some cognitive testing just to get a baseline level of where your executive function is at. After all these screening visits, or throughout the process, you may screen fail, which just means that you may be found ineligible to participate in that specific clinical trial, but that's not necessarily a negative. You may qualify for another one of our trials, either that is currently happening or that may happen in the future. So if it's okay with you, we would love to keep your information on file. And that's like completely up to you once you're in that stage of the process. Because if we do keep it on file and you seem to be a good match for a study that opens up in the future, you can be one of the first few contacted to participate. All right. If you don't screen fail, though, then you can enroll into the study. And that is what we then move into the randomization visit, which is when you would be assigned to either the experimental drug group or the placebo group. That visit may take up to 4 hours. We do another set of memory tests, questionnaires, vitals, blood and urine samples, just to, again, make sure that everything is okay for you to proceed through getting the first dose of the medication. And then with that, you may be asked to stay after the dose just for monitoring your safety. If there is any adverse event that comes up immediately, then at least you're at the center with a group of nurses, physicians that can care for you immediately. All right, now I want to touch on the reasons why others have chosen to participate. The first, and that I often hear, is to help others, not only in the Boston community, but worldwide. Obviously, Alzheimer's disease is something that affects a lot of people, not only in the United States. So a lot of participants choose to get involved in order to help others. They also like to volunteer to help develop new treatments and drugs, especially because research just allows us to learn more about the drugs we are developing. And those insights give us the opportunity to develop newer ones that are either targeting something we might not have focused on prior, or if the drugs we have been developing are working, just moving further along that track. Others chose to participate to help others with their or a loved one's medical condition. I hear this a lot. If you had a mother or grandmother who passed away sadly from Alzheimer's disease, then you want to help others that may also develop it, especially after seeing how hard that can be on the family. Last, people also participate to see a future with treatments for conditions with no current options. So Alzheimer's is one of those diseases that at the moment is not able to be cured. We're slowly starting to develop medicines that are at least slowing down the progression of the disease, which is a huge step that we've taken in recent years. People have been saying that Alzheimer's disease currently is where multiple sclerosis research was 25 years ago. And now people live with MS a couple of years, and they've really slowed down that progression of the disease. So hopefully the more we learn through research, the more types of people get involved in research, we'll really start to see a future with better treatments, more effective treatments for either slowing the progression of Alzheimer's and hopefully one day curing it. All right, at CART specifically, so our center, we conduct phase 2 and 3 clinical trials. So that is where we have larger cohorts of groups specifically dealing with the target disease. We provide medical testing and procedures in Spanish. We have a couple of different coordinators for research studies that can do these in Spanish, which is wonderful, especially for bringing in the Hispanic population of Boston. We welcome people from all backgrounds. And we're really working towards making Alzheimer's disease treatments more representative of what is needed for the US population. Like I started off saying with this presentation, is that at the moment, Alzheimer's disease results are very based off data from white participants because white non-Hispanic participants are more likely to get involved in research for a myriad of reasons. But what we really need is to increase the participation of other racial and ethnic groups in order to make the treatments that we're developing as effective as possible for your community. So we really need your help in order to do this. If you would like to hear more about the clinical trials we conduct at our center, or if you want to get information on getting involved in any research studies that we are currently enrolling for, you can visit our website to learn more about those studies. You can give us a call to schedule a screening phone call, or again, just to learn more, there is someone always available to help you out. Um, with that, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for joining today. And if anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Hey, I don't think anyone has any questions, but if you do, feel free to email me directly at at neighborhealth.com or training at
Yeah.
neighborhealth.com, and I can forward them to Stephanie.
Perfect. I'm also going to send my email in the chat in case anybody wanted to ask me a question directly. I'm always available. And yeah, thank you.